So let's really talk about why we believe all of that and what we can do about it. So as the slide says, the TPP was originally designed from the organization out, not from the market in. And of course, that's one of the fundamental problems with it, which is that it doesn't do what it needs to do, which is to describe to the organization a target for the product to hit, or hurdles for it to jump over in order for it to be commercially successful. So if you design its replacement, and I'm not going to show you the perfect form of its replacement, but if you design it from the outside in, I guarantee you will end up with a better target product profile. And you certainly won't end up with a target product profile. So let's ask some questions of really what the TPP is for. So is it a genuine target? In which case, why is there always a new one every time you ask? And if you are anything like us, we're always saying, well, what are you designing for? Which path are you taking to market? And what happens at that point is there's a mad panic, and people go around the organization looking for, well, where's the current TPP? Now, you can't have a current TPP if there is a target that you're aiming at. It can't be constantly shifting, because then you've got nothing to say, well, we agreed this is what we were going to do, if there's always a new one. So if it's always being updated, how can there possibly be something of any value sitting within the TPP? Because what you end up with, of course, is an actual product profile. So this is what the drug is currently shown in studies. That of course is of no value to anyone. It's just a statement of the data that you've collected. Or it becomes increasingly what we see, which is a projected product profile. So if the drug continues along the course that it's on, what do we project that it will become? So what's its projected product profile? So the next question is it a genuine target? So in which case, why are we constantly updating it? The next question is, why are we doing it at all? So what are we designing for? And the question is it something upon which to forecast? So are we really trying to assess the commercial opportunity with a target product profile, or are we looking to do something different? So are you really looking for a number which misses an opportunity? So there's something that the drug could be, but looking for an accurate number around that, but missing all of the other things that the drug could have been? Or would you be happier if you found an opportunity that you didn't have a perfect number for? And of course that presents one of the challenges for the TPP. So the next question is it an agreement between departments? In which case, does anyone ever get challenged with their non-adherence to the TPP? So if a product misses its target in phase 2, how often does your organization find a way to revise the TPP in the light of the new numbers? So it says, well, we just missed this, but we think there's enough of a signal that we can carry on and do that. And of course, that's also part of the problem. So if we think about what we've written about before, which is this idea of a draft label, the draft label, of course, presents much more of a contract between departments, because we need to understand if we're powered to show, to develop the claims that we're going to need to show at launch, or something beyond that. So the question is, what's the TPP for? What are we actually designing for when we're putting together a TPP? And of course, that potency is exciting, right? Which is that we begin to think about, well, what path do we want to pursue? What is the product profile that we want to pursue when we get there? And this is where being non-obvious is really important, because you have the chance in early phase to try to craft something more interesting. Along the way, of course, the template that was designed to do the kind of minimum description possible of a product that is enough to get buy-in to, we broadly all think we're going to do this, and these are the levels that we think it's going to be at. But what we're designing for should really be about understanding the opportunity for us to take different paths early in phase. So if it's to understand commercial value, well, there isn't enough in the TPP as it stands today to help you do that. Because of course, one thing that the TPP is very bad at is describing the commercial environment when you get to launch. It can't possibly understand it because everyone else who's in the same environment is going through the same challenges that you are. As who's going to be there, what will they have studied, what will their labels look like, what will their comparators be, what will the standard of care be in their development plan. So if it's to understand commercial value, it does an incredibly poor job of it, because we're going to take this out and we're going to show the TPP to people that have never seen TPPs before, and we're going to ask them, how often would you use this product? So it's a really bad way of understanding commercial value. Doesn't describe value terribly well, other than in terms of raw data, typically on standard comparators. So if it's to understand commercial value, it doesn't do a great job. But we also need to understand, in the great days of drug discovery and development, we were comfortable with uncertainty. The problem with the TPP is that it tends to present what we write down as certain. So we will do this, we will do this, we will do this other thing. And then we project a bunch of numbers on that with some degree of accuracy, but no real grasp of the fact that all of this is uncertain. We're going to put it into the study, we're going to see what it does, we're going to explore what it does, and we're going to see what range of effect that has. So are we dealing with uncertainty very well? Well, if we're dealing with uncertainty, we have to have more than one TPP. We have to, in early phase, be open to the idea that things are going to happen that we can't predict, that the market will respond in ways that we can't predict. And if you think about drugs that are on the market, those of you that work with marketed drugs, you'll know that even from year to year, the competition is hard to predict. And this is with a drug that's on the market, with a current profile, with a current formulation, so forth. Against this competition, it's hard to predict how it's going to do. So if you go all the way back into early phase and try and predict with some certainty how that drug is going to work, well, we're all dealing with this kind of falsely accurate belief that these numbers mean anything. And of course, the numbers then are used to trade product for product within a portfolio. So, of course, the challenge will come, which is, well, we need to understand whether the profile is competitive. And within certain parameters, of course, that's true. So 10% better than, 20% better than on certain parameters establishes some sort of competitive profile. But what it does is typically to describe table stakes. It describes entry stakes into a market, which are low enough that you can get over them, but typically high enough that the regulators might say yes to that product. Does it tell you whether it's competitive or not? Absolutely not. There is no way possible that your TPP establishes a profile in enough detail to tell you whether it's successful or not. And we always like to use this example of if you took the world's best ever car and you described it in perfect detail, but you left out that you'd need to service that car every 1,000 miles. Suddenly you've got the world's best car, but with a 1,000 mile service interval that you didn't write down up front, but that will simply not be competitive in its class. So the one thing that you left out meant more than all the things that you included. So the question is, does the TPP even do that? And of course, it doesn't do that very well. So what it tends to do is to help understand regulatory reaction. The problem with TPPs, even if you present upside and base cases and downside cases, is they tend to go for the obvious. So you already know what the regulators are going to think of your profile because it's based on the last thing that went through the marketplace. So the target product profile becomes compromised down to the idea of what the regulators are likely to approve. One thing that you won't know at that point is what they might have approved if you've done something different. So let's describe a little bit about what we mean by the things to think about within a TPP. So in path to market strategy, there's an inherent intrinsic differentiation, which we sort of show here with the molecule. The molecule is what the molecule is and does what the molecule will do. It will interact in the ways that the molecule will interact and a bunch of other things. That's all fine. You need to understand that. That's all part of the basic science. Your choices in creating a product the target product profile, include indication, regimen, formulation, dose, place in therapy, patient population, endpoints, biomarkers, device, the data that you'll collect, the label claims, the value proposition. Just think about all of those things that create your product, and it's a product of all of those choices that you'll make. So varying the formulation will make a very big difference to the product that you launch. And then on top of that, there is the brand. So there's the externalization of that, the messaging, the promotional activity, and so forth. But the product has an awful lot of things in it which are immensely variable, and of course they're all interrelated. They're all interrelated in describing risk. So of course there's risk if you change some of these things too early, but there's also opportunity if you were to vary some of these things early enough. So think about the idea of intrinsic, you're not moving it, and extrinsic differentiation, which is all of these things down here are things that you get to vary within the product profile. So as we begin to think through why this matters, well, it's because these are all interdependent decisions. So R&D and commercial all get to have a view about the positioning, the choice of comparators, the value proposition, how much technical risk you're prepared to accept, which endpoints, what the cost of the studies are, what the length of the studies are. And let's remember that anyone that fixes any one of these things down here has also fixed everything else for everyone else in the project. So as soon as you decide we're going up against competitor A, and we're going to do a 3-year study that includes 100,000 patients, suddenly everything else is fixed for everyone else. You understand the endpoints, you understand the value proposition innately. So we need to remember these are interdependent decisions. And the problem with the TPP as it stands is it's typically an R&D-led device where commercial are using that as a tool to try and estimate the commercial value. Do commercial have enough opportunity to change what goes on? Well, not often enough. So let's think about, let's say an Alzheimer's drug, and of course this is a space that's awash with failures at the moment, mostly because people have thought about Alzheimer's as a very straightforward disease where they're going to study ADAS-Cog and they're going to study decline in cognition over time. But if you think about anything that is likely to touch Alzheimer's, well, there's a bunch of things that it might have done differently. So it might have hit major depressive disorder, it might have hit Parkinson's, Lewy body dementia, it might have hit mixed dementia, it might have hit migraine, or But let's say, for example, that your organization wants an Alzheimer's drug. Well, at that point, you've still got 100 choices to make about what to study within Alzheimer's. So you could study executive function, you could study attention, you could study mood, you could study long-term memory, or what tends to get studied is cognition and attention, and cognition alone. So all of these things that it could have done, suddenly all of them are off the table, and you're back down to studying the same old as everyone else has always studied in Alzheimer's. Even when you're there, you still get the chance to think about, well, we're going for a single primary, we're going for co-primary, what's the approach to development, which patients are we going to include, severe, moderate, mild, prodromal, who are we going to compare ourselves to? Is it a single agent? Is it Aricept that we're going up against, or is there a combination as we're likely to do? So, of course, all of these things are choices that someone's made that narrow the freedom that everyone else has to make decisions about, well, what else could we have looked at? Had we looked at this differently? And that's great. That's, of course, what the TPP is designed to do. It locks down very early the thing that you're studying. So the problem with the TPP is typically that there's only one. And as long as you only have one option, you have no choice. You're following and hoping that drug is going to do better than the other drugs on the marketplace. So what you need is more options. You need to generate options. Let's say there are 5 things that you might choose to look at that the molecule could do differently than everything else that's on the marketplace. Well, what you might find is that of the first starting 5 options, that as soon as you iterate them and take them to customers, you might find that there's a 6th option which is even more attractive to everyone than the 5 that you had in there before. That's critical to the target product profile, which is it has to be there to understand and be improvable. So it becomes a prototype. Ideally, you'll have more than one prototype to be improved upon. Because when you go into evaluation, looking for technical feasibility, looking for commercial value and so forth, your decision should be based on this stage filtration of iteration, evaluation, improvement, and then decision as to what to take forward. So as you get into the idea of what's a strategic option, well, there's the asset, you're not changing that, but what you put it into clearly makes a very big difference. Then there's the environment that comes in from the other side. And of course, you're looking at what the asset will do and what the market might want. So you're looking for clinical, regulatory implications. You're looking for what the draft label can be, and really what the study requirements are going to be for that. So can you afford to follow that study through? Can you afford to take the path that you've decided upon? What's your source of business? And ideally at that point, it's really assumptions that go into your forecast. It's not a number that you're looking for, but it's the assumptions that your forecast is based upon. Then you need to understand your level of investment, your development timelines and so forth. And then really, ideally, you want to come up with another option. So the point about the TPP isn't just that it's a bad tool, it's that it can't possibly do the job of helping you understand how to take this molecule to market if you only have one. So, of course, the first proposition is you could have two. This one versus this one. You know, we could take it forward in Alzheimer's, we could take it forward in Lewy body dementia or mixed dementia. Well, there's two options. But what about if you had five? And at the point that you have five, things start to get more interesting because you start to play with them very differently than you would have done before. Or let's think about it the way, say, I'm hoping that you've seen the case study for Cymbalta. When you think about Cymbalta very early in development, there were three options to take Cymbalta forward as a basic average antidepressant into the Prozac space, launching as a successor to Prozac. Two of the options, though, three options in depression, two options which sat next to pain, depression with pain or pain without depression, were critical to how Cymbalta became Cymbalta. The choice to go over here clearly needed to be taken early enough in development that you could study it in phase 2 so that you could study it in phase 3. But this is from the case study on Cymbalta, and of course, most people with a TPP would have gone up and down this axis looking at effect on depression. If you have an antidepressant, you tend to study it in depression. So you go forwards and backwards on this axis and say, well, what are we going to trade off? Is it efficacy, that horrible word, versus safety? But of course, other drugs in the space already owned some other things. So Paxil owned anxiety, sleep was Surzone. So the idea was, very early on, which other axis do we want to explore next to depression? So we know it's going to have antidepressant activity, but what's the new axis? And as we all know, with Cymbalta, that became pain. So the next thing is about what we see breaking out now, this kind of management consultancy virus, which is that you should research TPPs. You can't research a TPP because no one understands what they're looking at. If I showed you the specification sheet for the iPhone 11 versus the Samsung 25, whatever, the specification sheet, which just details the kind of glass, what this kind of the chip speed and all of those things are, you don't know what you're going to do with that phone. You couldn't possibly understand enough technical detail to know what's on the sheet and what's not on the sheet. But we continue to research TPPs as if they're going to tell us something useful. Now, let's think about why we do that. Well, we do that to give ourselves some level of certainty that there's a competitive profile. But what if the people who you're asking don't know the answer either? And I've written before on this, which is, who do you ask when no one knows the answer? So will this product be competitive in 5 years' time? You didn't give them enough information to understand the competitive environment. And even if you had, no one really understands what they'll do with your drug because of the narrow way that you presented it. So you tend to get versions of what you present back to given back to you. But no one ever goes to the side and says, well, that's nice, but why don't you go and develop it over here? And even if they did, if they were the one voice in the market research study that suggested that, would you listen to them? Would you do something different? So we tend to talk at IDEA about this kind of indication-based strategic options, and of course there are lots of things that that you want to trade off against each other. So very early in development, probability of technical success, probability of regulatory success, probability of commercial success. Now we'll all accept that if you improve the technical risk within your study, you probably also decreased your probability of commercial success because you made the study easier, you made it easier to to pass the regulatory hurdles, and the study hurdles themselves. So was it a successful study? But probably you didn't build in any differentiation for your drug. So of course, then it also gets traded off against the market value. So how big is the market that you want to aim at? So is it a rare disease? Is it a macro disease, which we've tended to downgrade these days? What's the time to market, and what's the level of investment necessary? Now, what we understand about this is that these things are interdependent. It's like squishing a kind of a party balloon. Squeeze it in one area, comes out the other. So if you improve the probability of commercial success, you probably made the study harder. So the solution isn't just by varying these parameters within one profile. The solution comes from putting one next to it and another one next to that, and seeing which one is most attractive to the people that really matter in early phase, which are the portfolio decision makers. So those people who want to decide on, well, which profile do we want to take forward? And it might be that they want to emphasize speed, it might be that they want to emphasize size of market, it might be that they aren't prepared to take any technical risk. So we need to understand that these things are interdependent, and the way forward is to trade one off against another. So as we go forward, we ask ourselves the question: if you gave the same product, the same asset to two different groups within your organization, would they likely come up with the same profile? The answer, of course, is no. They're unlikely to do that because how could they? So many independent variables. The idea that two teams independently of each other would come up with the same profile is low. And already you understand then that one of them is likely to be better than the other. So if one is better than the other, why would you not want to find out what that profile is? You also know that if you gave the same asset, which increasingly happens to two different companies, they're going to pursue different development paths. Knowing that, what do you do as a consequence? So there's nothing that's obvious. There are only things that are choices and decisions that organizations make. So in retrospect, of course, the TPP doesn't apply design thinking because it doesn't do any of the things that you need to get done in an early phase, which is to understand opportunity, understand risk, but ideally to present to your organization a range of opportunities and a range of risks and a range of profiles that they could use to do something with. So the next question is, do you want accuracy in your numbers, or do you want something that you can begin to understand? So one thing, of course, that other industries do very well is that they give customers ways to create options. So you put in front of your customer a prototype, and they get to vary it and say, yes, but what if it did this other thing? Or yes, but I don't like the way that it does this. Could it do something else? And of course, we tend to think about molecules as if there's nothing else that you could do. But come back to that chart we showed before. The product itself is a product of lots of choices that you make about formulation, endpoints, patients, and so forth. You do get to vary the product that you take to market. So if your customers have a way to create options when they come back to you, not just I like it or I don't like it, or I would use it in 5% of my patients but not 30, well, then we're starting to use customers the right way. And if they come back to you with options, then you help portfolio managers make choices. Because it might be when they're looking across a suite of products, rather than trying to imagine who told the best lie when they came up with the forecast and reverse engineering it, what you could do if you present them with 5 options is to say, well, I'm going to move the fast to market option forward, or I'm going to choose this low risk one because we're not looking for risk this year, or this is our swing for the fences option and we're going to move this one forward. Inherent in each of these products, there's all of those. There is Cymbalta in pain versus Cymbalta in depression. One was an easy bunt onto first base, the other was swinging for the fences. That company at that time made that decision. Your company may not be ready to take those kinds of decisions. So One of the things that we like to sort of say a lot at IDEA is, without a concept to prove, there should be no proof of concept. And of course, phase 2 is used increasingly to look at proof of concept. So does the drug do what the drug claims to do? What's tending to happen these days is that we're designing back from the phase 3 into the phase 2 and looking for a signal in the numbers to move ahead to phase 3. That's literally not what phase 2 was for. Phase 2 was supposed to be an exploration of what the drug might do if we asked it, and to do it inexpensively, to do it at a time when it's appropriate, to look for those nuances within indications, and to begin to think harder about what is our competitive profile if we carved out a different path to market. So inherent in the TPP is that essential problem. If there's one, and it doesn't matter if there's a range of options all built around different levels of effect within the same parameter, we need to understand what it means early enough to say, take a space like rheumatoid arthritis and understand that we could have an effect on pain, we could have an effect on inflammation, we could have an effect on pathology. And if we have an effect on pathology versus an effect on pain, the stupidest thing to do would be to understand pain as an outcome for our phase 3 because we're playing in somebody else's field. But what if we began to understand early, well, what other things are we likely to affect if we work on pathology? Bunch of other indications, bunch of other paths to market that we could have taken. So if we come back to this kind of overall concept about what's the target product profile for, if we're going to use it, it has to be a target. It has to be invariable. There has to be some way of saying we've gone out and we've understood that if we hit all of these targets, tick, 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 and we don't miss any, that this product will be successful in the future when we launch it. We've understood all of the competition. So the idea that it's a target, of course, is one of the challenges. Then we think about the product bit of the product profile. So we need to think about formulation, dose, device, all of those other variables that we could be thinking about early enough to describe a product profile to ourselves. But even then, once you've got a target product profile, how do you know it's the right one? The only way to know it's the right one is to develop more than one and to develop a range. So we've called it before this enemy of innovation, because innovation, understanding the potential value for an asset or an invention. So invention to innovation. How do you deliver value? Fixing something too early removes all of the choice of everyone that comes later. And if we come back to what we were saying earlier about this interdependency, this interrelationship between approaches to market, if the R&D fix a profile, suddenly there's no choice to vary it. All you can try and do is understand the numbers. That's fine if that's the way you want your organization to behave. But if you believe that market access value, that the commercial landscape has any impact on what you study, well, early on in development, these should be regarded as interdependent and interrelated activities. That's why we believe that the TPP is not fit for purpose, because it doesn't do any of the things that it was originally cast for, other than feed management consultancies with market research programs, which they don't deserve. So if we come back to, let's give portfolio managers something that they can work with. We need to work with prototypes. We don't need to work with TPPs. If we're going to do a TPP at all, we should be developing draft labels, because draft labels do form a contract between departments, if you like, that this claim will be delivered if we do this study. We'll have the powering, we'll have the patient population, we'll have the patient population in the right geographies and so forth to deliver this claim into the label. And the label has the who, what, why, where, when, and what the comparators are, and what the risks are, of course. And I guarantee you, if you do label testing as opposed to TPP testing, that your customers at least will be able to understand what they're looking at. So this was a short one. You'll get some sense of why we are distracted by the TPP and why we believe that it should be redesigned to do the job that most of you need. The good news is, I don't think I've ever said this to anyone and had them disagree with me that the TPP is actually useful. No one likes it. the time is now to replace it, and innovation can only benefit if we start to explore what drugs do better back in phase 2 and into phase 3. So thank you. Apologies for yet again trying to figure out our platform. I'm assuming more of you will see this on demand than have seen it live, so thanks again.